Hey everybody, here we are with our next lesson of AP Environmental Science, and this is going to be Unit 5, Lesson number 11. We're going to talk about something called ecological footprints. It's a very short, very easy concept for us to talk about, so I want to make sure that we kind of get this and we keep on moving through. What does the College Board say that we must know? Well, it says that we should be able to explain the variables measured in an ecological footprint. Again, explain a little bit deeper, knowledge base than just kind of describing. So let's make sure we kind of go through this. Again, it's not too many slides, but I think you're going to pick up on it pretty quickly. And there's actually going to be an activity where you're going to be calculating your own ecological footprint associated with this lesson. Now, what is an ecological footprint? Well, an ecological footprint is actually just a made up representation. It's a representation of how many resources you use in your lifestyle and then how many Earths would be needed if everybody kind of lived the way you lived. So that's what you're going to do in your little activity for this lesson is that you are going to go and calculate your ecological footprint based as best you can on your lifestyle choices. And the idea that your ecological impact is really based off of a couple things. But one of the big things that's going to sound harsh is no matter how sustainable you try to live in the United States, especially with the simulator, you're going to see that you use a lot of resources. And that's because the United States uses a lot of resources for electricity generation, infrastructure upgrades, just operation of the United States. We are a very affluent society. So people have a lot of material goods. We live almost in a disposable society. So we throw a lot of things away. So all those things kind of factor together. So again, an ecological footprint is really looking at the idea of how many resources an individual, or what we would sometimes would say per capita. So if you hear something say per capita, it's really talking about how much per individual, or we're looking at it as an average for the entire society. Why do we do this? Well, we use it to compare different ways of life between different societies. And it helps for societies and individuals to make better decisions. One of the big reoccurring themes throughout this year, and a lot of people, when they take this class, they want to say, how can I be more sustainable? How can I save the planet? I don't have a great answer for that because it's going to apply to each individual differently. There are a lot of things that you can do to make better choices. And what I always kind of say is at the end of the day, if you're given a choice between A or B, and if you can afford both A or B, choose the one that is best for the planet. So if you can choose to make that best or most sustainable choice, that's awesome. Now, if you think about it over the course of a day, maybe you make 10 choices in a day. If you can make 7 or 8 of those choices that are the most sustainable, you're doing a very good job. If you don't care and you just make whatever choice you want, that's not necessarily going to help society. I know we talked just in the last lesson, talked about the tragedy of the commons, the idea of putting a society before an individual in some instances. Well, that's what kind of goes into sustainability. And we're going to talk a little bit more about sustainability once we get to like the rest of Unit 5 and so on, especially when we talk about agriculture and whatnot. You'll really notice the course kind of makes a big shift in Unit 5 away from more of an ecology and earth sciences standpoint to more of a societal and what can I do and just understanding problems associated with environmental troubles. So again, what we're really often looking at is comparing ecosystems and the way people live in different areas and what's called the biocapacity. Biocapacity, the amount of life an area can support. So usually the tropics are going to have higher biocapacities because they can generate more resources annually than everywhere else. And we're going to talk about that, and you'll hear about that in a later lesson, all about productivity. But the idea that resources can be generated at different rates, and then how are they used up? So let's take a look real quick at the charts we have on this PowerPoint right now. So let me just kind of pull up a pen here. So at the top, you kind of see the factors that go into an ecological footprint. So it includes forests and different forest products, meaning paper products. What type of paper products are you using and in what ratios and rates are you using them? Your carbon footprint, how much carbon do you use? How many fossil fuels do you use? How much carbon dioxide is generated into the atmosphere because of you? Cropland, how much food do you eat? Okay, I'm not calling anyone fat. I'm just saying sometimes one of the biggest ecological impacts people can have is making the choice for the most sustainable food. How many of you have given the option choose the veggie burger over the beef burger? How many of you choose to eat a vegetarian meal over, a chicken dish, something like that? Those different options actually impact your ecological footprint. Pasture, again, how much rangeland, so cropland being your vegetables and what's grown versus pasture, which is your your land-based proteins. Your built-up land, how do you live? Do you live in a small apartment in a big building? Do you own a very, very large house? Do you have paved roads depending on what country you lived in? And then the last one is fisheries. Do you eat a lot of fish? Fish can be very sustainable, or fish can be actually unsustainable depending on what type of fish and how frequently you eat it and where you live. You live in the center of the United States and you're ordering salmon every day. Yeah, that's getting shipped in from afar. But you live on the coast and you sustainably fish for your own, or what we call subsistence fishing. Yeah, now that's a far less of an ecological impact than other choices. And then here we see where at the bottom here, the different types of the different components that go into an ecological footprint, and then what areas are growing and shrinking is what I really want you to look at. If you look at the dark blue, which is our carbon, you see that that is expanding the most compared to past years. We start to see that our cropland has expanded, but not drastically. The development of land compared to historical levels is not as drastically different as carbon. So you want to start to make huge impacts on the ecological footprints or the way in which you live, living the most sustainable choices, choosing things that are going to be very low in carbon footprints. So you want to look for carbon neutral items or carbon deficit items. There are a lot of companies which advertise like, hey, for every one of these you buy, we plant a tree. Or for every dollar that's invested in this, we set aside more land for preservation. That's doing something to help minimize your carbon footprint. Then there's also other choices. Do you choose to get your power from coal or from natural gas or from renewable energy resources? Those have huge impacts. One of the big things that's really hard to wrap your head around is that no matter what the choices you make, it doesn't really have an impact on the world. I know it sounds really negative to say. The choices that you make every day don't really have an impact on the world. But what starts to happen is when people start to follow each other, and now as a collective, we start to make better choices as a society. Now we start to make differences. And the biggest thing that we can do to make changes is when you buy items. You, with your money and purchasing an item, have more power than any vote. By choosing to purchase from sustainable sellers or retailers, you're pretty much telling the world that you support this type of business. So by choosing companies that are very sustainable and that minimize their disruption, and they choose sustainable manufacturing products, they choose different things like that, you are making a huge difference. All right, moving on. Here's another look at now how each country kind of compares. And that's really what kind of people everyone kind of looks at. Like, how does the United States compare to everyone else? Here's a hint. The United States is the worst country to live in from an ecological footprint standpoint. Yes, we're a great country. I love the United States. I love the freedoms that we are allotted. But there are a lot of ways in which we are very, very wasteful in the United States. It's our lifestyle. And if you look at the lifestyle of many other countries around the world, they're nothing like ours. The idea, if you were to go to many developing nations and say you could go and buy a burger for what would equate to like, I don't know, 15 minutes of work for some of you, maybe even less, depending on how much you're paid per hour, depending on that rate, to tell other people around the world, which may work the entire day for the equivalent of $2, or maybe even less than $2 in hourly or daily wages, not hourly wages, daily wages. How does that compare? Well, the United States is a horrible place in that. but that's the society we've been raised in. So we have to kind of lead by example. That's always my big push, is that the United States leads by example from a sustainability standpoint. If we start to push sustainability on the planet, we are the big kid. We are the cool kid in the class. We are the one that, like, man, everyone wants to do that. We're the social media influencers of the world. And if the United States starts to do much more in the environmental realm, the world will follow. But right now, we have a lot of turmoil and big business that was built around archaic practices. The idea of oil and coal and natural gas, they are fuels of the past. And the idea that renewable energies can't even get into the marketplace because these big fossil fuel companies are just pushing them out of the way. They have so much money, they have so much lobbying power that they continue to find laws that benefit them, and they do not help us to promote sustainable choices. It's something that will make you upset at the world if you look at it from the big picture ideas. So something that I want you to kind of start to look with that lens, open up your eyes and start to kind of see those different choices that you can make and how they impact different areas. So what about, how does the world look? Well, the world has about a 1.7 average, so the whole population of the world, if everyone lived the same way, we'd still use up more resources on the planet than we generate. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, it means we're not living sustainably. We're not living sustainably in that we will actually run out of materials eventually. Now, what's starting to happen, though, is the birth rates on the planet are starting to slow. Population growth rate on the planet is still going up. All right, we are still growing as a population on the planet, but it's going to start to slow down. And you'll learn about that in Unit 3. All right, but you can kind of see here a world map and which countries are living in deficits and which ones are living in surplus based on their biopacity. Again, the resources that are provided to them from their region of the planet. So a lot of the North American countries, besides Canada, are living in deficits. All across that latitude, you see all of Europe living in deficits. Most of the Middle East, all in deficits. Most of Asia, especially the big populous countries in Asia, are living in deficit, and that's due to those large populations. Areas where you have a lot of natural resources available, they're living with a surplus. So Brazil, for example, is living in surplus, but that's because the Amazon is able to provide just an immense amount of resources to the planet as long as it's sustained and protected. And as you've noticed probably in 2019 or the summer of 2019, there was a lot of threats to the Amazon. Well, those threats have always been there, just finally became publicized. So now they're starting to address those things. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause this video and I'd like you to watch this video. I know it sounds like a little video inception type thing. Stop this, watch this. But this, again, kind of goes through the idea of how does an ecological footprint is calculated, and then how does everything kind of build off of there. One of the last concepts I want to talk to you about is the idea of Earth Overshoot Day. And what that really means, Earth Overshoot Day, is if we look at the calendar year from January to December 31st as like kind of like a clock, when do we run out of resources based on our usage of those resources? So obviously the United States using up more resources than pretty much every other country, we're going to kind of run out of time faster than most other countries. So the United States here is, where are they at? March 15th, they run out of their resources, or we run out of our resources. Better grammar there. Means we are one of the most affluent countries. We use some of the most resources available of any of those countries. Now, if you compare that around the world, you can see which countries are living more sustainable. And it maybe is due to very poor infrastructure and actually developing nation aspect. But there's different ways in which you can make an impact. Now, how does the United States start to change? That's one of the big things. If we identify your ecological impact is really based on three factors: your population, the affluence of your area, and then the technology associated with it. You're not going to change the human population. Okay, I know what someone in this room. It happens to me every year. So I really wish you guys were in class right together right now, because it's always really awkward to have that conversation with one person. But the idea of, oh, I'm going to go and control the human population. Even if you, hypothetically, this is the worst analogy and worst scenario I can kind of play out, but if you slaughtered a human being every hour of every day for an entire year, how many people are you actually slaughtering? Well, it's going to be 24 times 365. And if you think about that number, even whatever that number is, off the top of my head, I can't think of it. All right. It's not that much. The human population in the United States is 330 million people. In order to really make an impact, you'd have to be Thanos with your little glove and it'll snap. Now, from an ecological standpoint, how did that kind of play out? How does that change everything? Well, that's something that, we kind of talk about as a theory, a theoretical application, but nothing really concrete. But it's just the idea that, your population is not going to change. So what about affluence? Well, how do you tell people to change their lifestyle? Like, oh, you shouldn't have a cell phone, or, oh, you shouldn't be able to drive that car. You can't drive that car. Well, they can make some laws, but for the most part, people are going to do whatever they want. If you notice, the wealthy people are able to do really whatever they want. You want to go fly somewhere? Go fly somewhere. People own their own jets, right? They create an immense amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. People have many, many different cars because they want to own these things. People dispose of things. They just go out and buy a new one because it's far easier than fixing things. And for society in America, most things aren't really able to be fixed that easily anymore. So it becomes very problematic. The biggest way in which we can change the United States and our ecological impact is through technology. Yes, most technologies have gotten to us to this point. We've gotten to the point where we are using up and being very wasteful. But we can come up with better technologies to better recycle. We can come up with better technologies for power generation. We can come up with better technologies to produce less carbon dioxide. And it is those technologies that are going to make a difference in our society. So hopefully you kind of understand that our ecological impact is going to be most drastically changed by our advancing green technology. So here is the ecological footprints per person. Again, I kind of go back to the United States being really bad. Part of the reason why I put the United States above these other 4 countries is because our population is drastically larger than all 4 of them even combined. Of the big populous countries, the United States is up there. You have then China, Russia, India, Japan. Those make out the big 5 of populations. But the idea that the United States, or actually, I'm sorry, Japan is not in the top 5 of populations. But ecological footprint, average per person. Different tests will come up with different things. I forget what the exact unit is for the United States here. Whatever this measure is, 7.19, some sort of made up metric. But I want you at the end of this lesson to think, do I understand what goes into this ecological footprint? Do I understand why the United States is higher than many other countries? Right? Do I understand what I can do, what choices I can make to lower my ecological footprint? And if you can kind of say, I get it. Some of these choices I make, just kind of where I live, I don't need to live in the biggest house, but I want to be comfortable. I don't need to live in a very, very tiny apartment. I want to be able to have my own yard. Like that was my thing. I always want to have my own yard. I want to eventually live on a farm. But right now, can you make those choices? And if you can make those choices, and if you can start to kind of open your eyes to living a little bit more sustainably, I've done my job already this year. All right. If I get you to kind of open your eyes and kind of think that way, I don't have to worry about teaching you anything special this year. You're good to go. All right. But over the next couple months, hopefully, while we're sitting in this class, hopefully you're actually sitting in this class. And it's not just me talking to this camera on a cart in front of the room. Hopefully you guys start to understand what's going on. And with that, if you understand everything, fantastic. If you don't, shoot me an email. But I look forward to seeing you guys at the next lesson. We're actually going to jump back into unit number 1 with our next lesson, kind of get back into this ecological ideas. But but I really wanted to jump in here and kind of get you guys to open your eyes and start to think sustainably over the course of this course, so we can actually make a difference in society and kind of find things that are interesting to you. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson. Have a great one.
You like that lesson? I know you did. So why don't you go ahead and smash that like button right now. Go ahead and comment. Tell all your friends about how great that lesson was. And make sure you subscribe, because I'm going to keep bringing you AP environmental content that you're going to want to watch. Or do whatever else those other YouTube channels tell you to do. And with that, Maloney, out.